Last week I walked into my local DIY dog wash. I hauled Molly up into the dog tub, soap, conditioned, rinsed, towel dried, and blow dried her fur to fluffy perfection. Lifted her out and marched her up to the register to pay. The cashier rings me up, smiles, and says, "Would you like to leave a tip?" If you're sick and tired of tipping every time you turn around, especially at places where you serve yourself, you are not alone. In this video, I am diving into the out-of-control tipping culture in the United States, and more importantly, why focusing the discussion on worker versus consumer is a red herring companies love because it takes the focus off of the real issue, which is a company's refusal to pay fair working wages to their employees, instead relying on consumers like you and I to cover the difference in tips. So what do you think? Should we be tipping at self-serve places? Or should businesses just start paying a fair wage and stop relying on consumers to pick up the tab? Drop your kind and respectful thoughts in the comment section below. I'd love to hear what you have to say. Okay, ladies, let's dive right in. Picture this. You walk into a fast casual restaurant like Chipotle or a self-serve spot like a coffee or frozen yogurt. You go to the counter, place your order, and wait for the cashier to ring you up. That'll be $9, please. Insert your card, and what pops up? The tipping screen. And you're left thinking, what exactly am I tipping for? In environments like coffee, frozen yogurt, my DIY dog wash example, fast food or fast casual restaurants, we as the consumer are doing most all of the work. You order, you pick up, you customize. There's no wait staff bringing your food to the table, checking to see how you're doing, clearing your plates, and yet these places still prompt us to tip. You're not sitting down for a full service meal. To be crystal clear, ladies, I am directing this solely at employers who are responsible for creating their own compensation models, not at the workers who are simply doing their job. I want to be clear about that. And for workers in this particular industry, the discussion isn't between you and the consumer in terms of whether or not they should be tipping. If you're not getting paid a fair working wage without receiving tips, the conversation is between you and your employer, not the customer. But where did tipping start? Okay, let's break it down, ladies. Tipping has its roots in a time when servers relied on tips to make up for low wages in industries like restaurants, where a higher degree of service was part of the job. It was about rewarding someone for their efforts in taking good care of you. In self-serve places, that level of service does not exist. You're doing all the work. Being pleasant to a customer, making suggestions, explaining a menu item, and ringing you up are basic job functions for which they are already being compensated with their hourly wage. Asking consumers to tip for that, and let's be honest, ladies, when that screen pops up, don't you feel kind of weird and kind of obligated to tip? I think we all do at a certain point. Inevitably, what it feels like to me is an invisible or involuntary surcharge. Here's where the problem starts, and in my opinion, it's just gotten so out of control in the United States, I can't even see straight. More and more businesses are increasingly turning payroll responsibilities from themselves into what I call a shared compensation model between themselves and you and I, the consumer. Instead of paying employees a livable wage, they're very clearly relying on you and I in order to subsidize their payroll. In short, the system is nothing more than a way for companies to save on labor costs, thereby increasing earnings, margins, and personal profits for themselves. At our expense, I might add. And for places, especially big chains like Chipotle, Starbucks, etc., y'all, those corporate executives are making millions. Let me say that again, millions and millions of dollars a year, notwithstanding profit sharing and stocks. You're not going to tell me that they cannot afford to offer their employees a living wage. They're not doing it simply because they don't want to take it out of their end. So they'll couch it in ways like, well, if we had to do that, then we'd have to raise prices. No, they don't. They don't want to take it out of their pocket. That's the real argument. The real argument is we don't want to take it out of our pocket in order to pay them a higher wage, so we're going to ask you to tip. Again, the argument isn't between the worker and the consumer. The argument is between the worker and the employer. To be crystal clear again, I am not against tipping where it makes sense and where most of us are used to doing it. Any full-service restaurant where professional servers, bartenders, and other staff are actively taking care of you. Same with hairstylists, spas, nail service providers, my regular dog groomer, regular places where most of us would expect to tip for good service. I am a very generous tipper. If you're in the service industry, you want me at your table. But for places where I'm actually served. In certain states, for example, California, where I live, as of January 1st, minimum wage was bumped up to $16.50 an hour. And employers are not permitted to pay servers under minimum wage with the expectation that they'll make it up in tips. It has to be the minimum wage, $16.50 plus tips. The red herring here is the false narrative that tipping is a way for consumers to directly reward good service. It's not. It has now morphed into an expectation that we as consumers continue to subsidize the employer's payroll. Instead, I will put forth that it is incumbent upon employers and corporations to pay their people a living wage that does not depend on consumer generosity. It's all about paying employees what they deserve up front without relying on the goodwill of consumers to make up the difference. It's also much better for the employees who can now plan a budget because their paycheck is no longer dependent on whether or not people are going to tip them. Let's remember, those working in the service industry are not independently wealthy and they're not doing it just for fun. They're doing it to earn a living, to put food on the table, to pay their bills just like everybody else. They need to know how much their monthly income is in order to budget accordingly, just like everybody. Having to depend on tips in order to make rent isn't fun and it has to be extra stressful for them. So what can we do about it? All right, well, one person doesn't make a difference, but all of us cumulatively can. From a consumer level, we vote with our pocketbooks. As cringy as it felt at first, I no longer allow myself to feel guilty not tipping for my $8.59 latte at Better Buzz. Here's where I personally draw the line. If I'm walking up to a counter to order or pay, I don't tip. When frozen yogurt for two costs $24, not joking, $24 at Swirls near my house, I don't feel the need to tip the suggested 20, 22, or 25% on top of that. I just don't. And again, in California where I live, the kid, well, he looks like a kid to me, or probably early 20s, is already getting $16.50 an hour. Honestly, I feel that is plenty to ring me up and maybe restock the yogurt. The more of us who take this stance, the more pressure is going to be placed on the employer as they'll start to experience greater difficulty finding and keeping good workers. But that's my stance. What say you? Comment below, and as always, please be the kind and respectful lady that I know you are. Have a great weekend, ladies, and I'll see you next week.